bigger challenges.
Right. So they wanted to be closer to the front line, as it turned out. When Freud first developed psychotherapy, he developed this technique of free association. Okay, so all free association is, and this is why Freud put people on the couch and sat behind them. See, if I'm face-to-face with you and I'm laying out the problem space, just what you're signaling to me by your face might stop me from fully revealing the truth, because maybe you'll raise an eyebrow, or there'll be a micro expression of disgust or contempt, or you'll look away, or because I'm going to be evaluating you to see how you're reacting morally to my revelations. So Freud just hid himself. He said, and I don't think that's strictly necessary, but it's a very wise intuition, and you can imagine how it would be helpful. So now I think the counter to that is you can signal to someone who you're talking to, like, open reception of the message they're receiving, right? It's just that, and kids love this, right? One of the things kids are doing all the time is testing you to see if you're paying attention, and they will modify their behavior in any way imaginable to get attention. It's because there's no difference between attention and love, by the way. Like, there's no difference. And so I don't think you have to hide yourself from your client, but that's why Freud did it. Now, what Freud noticed, and the psychoanalysts noticed, is that if you let people free associate, the topics that they picked would be linked to one another. That reminds me of this. That reminds me of this. That reminds me of this. Now, obviously, because people aren't just emitting random noises, there's a reason the things they're revealing are linked. There's some implicit similarity that they're striving toward. Now, often what'll happen if you listen to your wife, for example, she's laying out a bunch of problems and it'll spiral. It'll remind her of something. This happened with Freud. If you got to the gist of it, it would remind people of something that happened to them much earlier in their life, and often something that was traumatic. So a trauma is a problem you encounter in your life that's quite deep, so that it unsettles you, that you do not resolve. So it's like, imagine that in your bedroom, there were holes that you could fall through into trouble. And so you want to make a map of where all the holes are so that you can walk through the landscape without falling into the pit. Now, it'd be better if you just fixed the holes, but at least you have the landscape mapped out. Well, a trauma is a hole that hasn't been filled in. And so maybe if you had a trauma when you were 4, you hit a wall and you couldn't resolve the trauma, that's no different than not maturing in relationship to that problem. So what you have at hand there are only the tools that you developed by the time you were 4. Now, then you might encounter a situation where that's reminiscent of that. So, for example, someone might say, I had a problem with my boss. I have a recurring problem with my boss. And so you listen to him, he says, that reminds me exactly of what my father did when in this situation when I was a kid. And so the reason the person is reacting to their boss in a negative way is because they're using the same conceptual structure that they used to construe their father when they were 4. You'll see this in marriages all the time. Like, if you have a recurring problem with your partner that you really can't understand. Now, it might be your fixation at some developmental stage that's the problem. Like, she's interacting with you in a way that elicits your 13-year-old self consistently. But she also might be reacting to you in a way that elicits her 13-year-old self. And so then, but if you listen to her, she'll get to that. And then she'll tell you the story, and then sometimes she'll be able to figure out what to do about that herself, or sometimes you'll have to discuss it, but it almost always results in tears, almost always. And I think the reason for that is that what happens is when people break down in tears, so children cry quite often, and they cry when they encounter an impediment that they can't surmount. And I think what tears do is dissolve you to the state of neurological plasticity that characterizes early childhood so that you can learn. Now, people don't like that, right? That reversion, it's humiliating, but you have to break. That's the crying. The crying is an indication that the current conceptual structure is insufficient. It has to die. And then the tears come, right? And then now you're prepared neurologically to learn something new. And that'll be whatever comes out of the discussion. And that'll replace that old conceptual structure that's outdated and immature with a new, somewhat fragile conceptual structure, right? And then the person will try that out a couple of times. Like maybe this is something where it's like something that's just come out of a cocoon. You have to be very careful when you negotiate with your partner because, maybe they'll decide that they'll try a new tactic that you have both agreed on. But the first 30 times they implement that new tactic, first of all, they won't do it very well because it's new. And second, if you punish it, it'll kill it right away.
Yeah, so you're describing my relationship very accurately because I am someone who so what's my sort of attachment style? I